I'll take a couple approaches. One is I'm happy to talk about same-sex marriage, LGBTQ issues with people. But if they're not Christians, ultimately they're operating from a very fundamentally different worldview. They probably have the ethic that says, sexual expression is good, and to not
Mhm.
express yourself sexually
Mhm.
is bad and it's repressive.
Mhm.
They also probably have the view that I should be able to do whatever I want if it feels good, and nobody should be able to tell me not how to live as long as I don't harm anybody. These underlying ethics that people bring to the discussion are radically different than a
Mhm.
Christian worldview that says, honor God with your body because you're bought with a price.
Mhm.
There's a design and purpose to sexuality. And freedom comes not from living whatever feels good, but from actually conforming our lives to an external truth. So, given the radically different worldview, I will have those conversations if people feel like it. But oftentimes I'll say, look, let's first ask the question, who is Jesus? Because if there is a God and he's designed us to live a certain way, then that changes everything. So I was with a group of skeptics, and I'll never forget, I said, if there were a God and he designed you to live a certain way, would you follow what that God said?
Mhm.
And they looked at each other. They're like, well, who is this God? Why is his opinion more valuable than ours? And I hit, oh my goodness. They're not willing to follow this no matter what. They essentially are their own gods. I
Mhm.
don't think there's anything I can do apart from an openness and willingness in their life to admit that there's a truth outside of them
Mhm.
to convince them that this is good. But insofar as people are open, I want them first to see, look, there's been no one throughout the history of the world that cares about the marginalized
Mhm.
more than Jesus.
Mhm.
There's been no major religious leader who treated women with more dignity and
Mhm.
honor and respect than Jesus.
Mhm.
Who is this person, Jesus? Let's start there.
Mhm.
And then we can talk about what that means for our sexuality. And if they're
Sure.
not willing to go there, then there's probably nothing else I could say to
Mhm.
change their heart. And by the way, Jesus let the rich
Mhm.
young ruler just walk away.
That's right.
So that's how I would approach an issue like this.
Mhm. Mhm.
Freedom, Sean brought up freedom. Freedom is not the capacity to do what you want to do. Freedom is to have the capacity to do what you know you ought to do.
Mhm.
And if you don't have the freedom to do what you ought to do, then you're not free.
Mhm.
There's certain things in your life, well, I can't help myself, then you're not free, you're in bondage.
Mhm.
And Christ calls us to follow his example, and then he empowers us with the Holy Spirit to do it, which is
Mhm.
it's kind of neat.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
I would say in this issue, the first is to listen.
Hmm.
I would ask a lot of questions. I would listen to the person.
Mhm.
And then I ask this question so much.
Yeah.
I do it to people on the street and everything because racism is in the news today. And there's probably no term that is misused than racism and hatred today.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh, so much when somebody accuses somebody of being a racist, it's a response because of the lack of character to overcome your own biases and prejudices.
Mhm.
But I'll ask them, is racism wrong? Everyone will say yes.
Hmm.
And I'll say, well, why? It's interesting. Hardly anyone, adults, youth, or anything, can ever answer why is racism wrong.
Mhm.
I'll ask, is it wrong to kill? Well, sure
Mhm.
it is. Why?
Mhm. Mhm.
And they can't answer it.
Mhm.
But as believers, we better be able to answer those things first ourselves.
Yes.
But I I will follow up with listening to them
Mhm.
uh, on what is the value of a person? What is truth? Uh, what is reality to you?
Mhm.
What would show you that something is true,
Mhm.
etc.
Mhm.
And then you go with the flow.
Mhm.